It's time for a sequel to my Warrior Teardown build. And this is actually tested in hard mode, and I've been using this to vanquish areas. So this build is really fun, and it can deal a lot of damage. And I'm going to show you a basic version of it, and then some variants, as well as include the build codes, because I neglected to do that in previous videos. So, alright. So the first thing you'll want is a good scythe. Now for the inscription, you can run 15% while enchanted, 15% above 50, whatever you prefer. You can run vampiric or armor pen, doesn't really matter. Mysticism 5 is decent because it shaves off energy cost and gives you +5 base armor while enchanted. You could also run soul reaping. I would say either of those is perfectly acceptable. Now, if you're running cons, you get extra energy, which is nice. So generally, when you're running the build, you want to maintain 7 weapon stance. For attributes, you want to have 16 strength, because what will happen is it'll actually last longer than its cooldown, which is nice, so you have an extra second. With cons or pcons, you can get it up to 22-second duration. Generally, I always try to have Rending Aura on me at all times as well, so that as I enter combat, I can immediately Pious, and then build up into Radiant, into Chilling, and then just kind of like loop through everything, and then use I Am Unstoppable as needed, depending on if enemies knock you down or not. But generally, if enemies are balled up between Pious and Chilling, you have huge nuke potential, and you can also change out Chilling Victory for Reap Impurities if you want to knock conditions off of enemies for holy damage, or if you have a Necro putting Weakening Aura on you, so that you can just keep spamming that. Now, the build is pretty strong outside of 7 weapon stance being removed, but if you have this precast, it should already be on cooldown all the time, so if it does get removed, you should be okay because it'll be coming back soon anyways. But ideally, you try to avoid enemies that remove the stance because that does kind of hard counter you. But with 7 weapon stance, you're obviously looking at 20 Scythe Mastery, which is crazy. So you get huge damage on all of your abilities, plus cracked armor from Rending Aura. It's time to test this out in hard mode. So I'm going to do some things. I'm going to precast, because that's usually a good idea. Then we're going to move forward. Guy's going to slow us down and go for his little moves there, but we're going to focus on these Mesmers really quick. So what we're looking for is big damage and team support, which we are providing, essentially. The idea behind this build is that we're trying to kill as many things as quickly as possible, while also maintaining save yourselves as much as possible. I would argue this is as good as meta builds for Warrior, because like legitimately you have a ton of damage, even without Splinter Weapon. With Splinter Weapon, you easily top damage over E-Surge Mesmers, like with cons and everything. Like you can just see how much damage I'm dealing just by myself. No cons, this is just hard mode. This build just completely wrecks. Now, obviously, there are things like Vow of Strength, Dervish, and stuff like that, where you could run Save Yourselves. The difference between the two is Vow of Strength probably has better burst, but if you have Splinter Weapon, it's about the same. Obviously, the adjacent attack is where you're going to get most of your damage from, so it's a little bit more competitive in that way. But if enemies are scattered and they aren't balled up at all, this build out damages Vow of Strength for sure, because you have 20 Scythe Mastery. And then also, when dealing with enemies that remove the stance, I recommend casting the stance or activating it in between combat, so it's always kind of on cooldown. So that way, if it gets ended early, you just, can reuse it. Another thing to do is generally, because you're a warrior, enemy melee will not focus you, so enemy assassins with Wild Strike and enemy warriors with Wild Blow will typically ignore you if you just kind of do one of these. Generally, they won't attack you directly. Like you can see, they're running right past me to go to the back line. So for the most part, as long as you don't body block, you shouldn't have your stances removed unless, you get them stuck on you. But if you run an Ineptitude, usually the Ineptitude will proc, and then, you don't get your stance removed because the enemy's blinded. That can be a way of dealing with it. Another way is through blocking. But you can really see how the build works. Like, you support your team. You support your ST, because if your ST spirits go down, you can easily wipe. And then, Psychic Instability can hold people, which is kind of nice. But this is the team I actually use for 3-man vanquishes. I use cons, though, but right now I'm not for the sake of demoing it. I like to stress test without cons, because sometimes cons make things seem better than they are. And without them, maybe they're not as good. Maybe you don't run cons all the time, so maybe you want to make sure your builds actually function without them. Some players only play with cons, so it really depends. But generally, if things are balled up, they're dying with this build. So it's pretty fun. Now with Splinter Weapon, your damage skyrockets, and you can add that on like a BIP Rit, get them like 15, 16 channeling, and then your Splinter Weapon nuke off of multi-hit is crazy as hell, as you would expect. So this can like hard carry. This is also good to use if you're playing with other players because you have Save Yourself. You can also change the build around a bit. Like you don't have to run Rending Aura, you can run other things. So if you want to run, let's say we don't need anti-knockdown. I Am Unstoppable is good for the armor, but you're a warrior, and if you have an ST, you probably don't need it unless you need the knockdown prevention. So you could run other things. Grenth's Fingers is nice because it transfers conditions from you to all nearby, but it also has a little bit of damage, and it's cheap to cast. So right now I'm running Mysticism 5, and then I'm running Strength Headpiece with Strength plus 3. I do recommend that because then your base duration of the stance is 21 seconds. So you have an extra second, and then with cons, it's 22 seconds. So you have 2 extra seconds, which can matter because sometimes you just need like an extra hit or two before you can get Adrenaline to use Radiant, which then refills your energy. Now you can run Soul Reaping on this. There's also things like Vow of Piety if you maintain it. So whenever enchantment ends, it renews. So the upfront cost will be kind of steep because it's 15 energy, but it'll keep renewing itself. And obviously you can get torn down, but this gives you some armor and health regen. So there's like different weird options. But there's also Earth Prayers too. You could run Earth. So like let's say you wanted like Sand Shards or something. You could run Sand Shards, and if you really wanted to, you could run something like this, and then you could drop the Teardown. So you could run something like this, and then you have an optional slot. Now, if you're running Sand Shards, this combos with itself. This triggers on all the struck foes. This can hit more foes because it has adjacent radius. And then if you have Splinter Weapon, this combo is pretty huge. And then this is good for single target and maintaining energy. And if you wanted to, you could probably drop Chilling for something else. You could still run a Teardown. I like Pious because it hits the target. And as long as you select a target that's adjacent to others, like they'll still be dealing extra armor, ignoring damage, which is nice. But you can always run Reap Impurities. That's always good to use if you can get enemies to ball up. But it really depends on your preference and what you want to use. Armor of Sanctity can be quite good as well for tanking. This is an incredibly tanky skill. Some things, like adding armor, doesn't reduce mesmer damage, so enemy mesmers can still hit through Save Yourselves. Now, you aren't going to have Save Yourselves, but as the warrior, you have high armor, so enemy mesmers are always a threat to you because they're armor ignoring damage. This does reduce their damage, and it's very nice. Same thing with like holy damage and like Ray of Judgments and things like that. But it really depends on what you want out of the build. And, you know, how defensive you want it to be, how offensive you want it to be, what utilities you want. Zealous Sweep can be good as well. If you multi-hit with it, it can spike up Save Yourselves. 4 Great Justice is obviously really good, so I do recommend always running that. I prefer, if you're just going to run one skill, Wind Prayers, because you basically get the exact same damage and effect. So Rending Aura is a little bit better than Staggering Force. They do the exact same effect, the exact same cost, exact same cooldown, but Rending Aura also removes enchantments from knockdown foes. So if you have any form of knockdown, in my case I have Psychic Instability, so if I have this up and I'm whacking enemies and they're knocked down, I'm removing enchantments from them. So it's pretty good actually. So if you're just running one Teardown, I recommend Rending Aura if you had to choose, but if you want some stuff from Earth Prayers, there are good things there. And then obviously with this build, now we have Cracked Armor from Rending, and then Deep Wound from Body Blow, and because you're wielding a scythe, this can hit 3 targets. So if there's 3 targets balled up, you can inflict Cracked or Deep Wound on 3 of them for adrenaline cost. So pretty good. This build doesn't really run into energy problems. Mysticism 5, Soul Reaping 5, Energy Storage 5, all totally viable for different reasons. Mysticism reduces the base cost of your Teardowns slightly. It also gives you 5 armor while enchanted, which is nice. It's base armor, so it doesn't count towards the armor bonus with 25. So you just have base armor. Energy storage is nice because it increases your total energy pool, and if you run energy plus 5 on the scythe, you can get plus 20 energy. That's obviously really nice for, you know, just having a ton of energy. And then soul reaping is obviously great because as you're killing things, you're refilling your bar. So you can burn through all your energy, kill something, and then as things are dying, it refills your energy. So all of them are good. Mysticism for tanking and, you know, reducing the cost of the enchantments. Soul reaping for energy management. Energy storage for just raw energy, which can then be topped off and maintained by spamming Radiant. Radiant does return 9 energy at 20 Scythe Mastery, so it's giving you quite a lot of energy back. But I find that Mysticism is nice because of the slight increase in tanking, and I'm spamming Rending Aura constantly, so even though Soul Reaping is probably more optimal, I prefer the tanking, but I'm probably going to build another Scythe up that has Soul Reaping on it anyways and switch between them as needed. Because, for example, if the fight is over and there's like 2 or 3 enemies that are about to die, you might as well switch to a Soul Reaping weapon. And it doesn't even have to be a Scythe. Like, you could have... The other thing that's nice about 7 weapon that I don't think a lot of people realize is you can actually just straight up equip other stuff. So, like, for example, if I switch to this and I have 7 weapon active, I can attack with a sword. Now, it's going to be less damage, but I can equip a shield. So if I want to have I can see clearly now, for example, which is something I usually run, we pop 7 weapon. Whoops. And now I have, where is it? There we go. 17 swordsmanship, 19 if I just throw my remaining slots in there. So I basically have 20 sword, and I can attack and tank. So if I need to quickly switch or move blind for myself, or, you know, my team is like about to wipe, or there's like a huge problem, maybe I'm getting focused and souls or you know, ST spirits are down, I can quick switch to this, tank for a few attacks, and still attack. And also, look at this, Pious Assault is a melee attack, and it functions. So it's some interesting things here. You could also switch to an axe or a hammer, and you can still run Rending Aura into Pious with a sword. So there's some interesting things. And there's also other Scythe attacks, like Twin Moon is a melee attack, for example. Victorious Sweep is a melee attack. Anything that's a melee attack can be used by any other weapon, including a hammer. So you could switch to other weapons. Not that you really should. Mostly you should be on a Scythe, but if you need to tank really quick, you can switch to a sword and shield, and you can still attack for damage. So I guess we'll show that for the hell of it. I don't really recommend doing it unless you really need to. I'm still dealing good damage here. Look at this. Isn't that crazy? It's pretty cool, actually. Kind of neat. Now, if you're getting focused by armor ignoring damage, a shield is not going to help you. So like right now, I'm getting focused down here, but I should have opened with a Scythe, but you can see that even with the sword and shield, I was doing okay. So yeah, pretty interesting build, pretty fun. Definitely recommend it. Give it a try. If you enjoyed this, definitely drop a comment. Let me know what you think about this build video. I'll have a few different versions of the build in templates, codes down below you can take. But yeah, definitely like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next one. Peace.